How did a democratically elected chancellor of Germany become a totalitarian dictator? People forget that Hitler was democratically elected. He also never overturned the Weimar Constitution. What happened was the Germans governed for virtually the entirety, the Nazis governed for virtually the entirety of their time in power, 12 years, under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which allowed for the suspension of German laws during a time of emergency. So there was this declared state of emergency. There was this sense of urgency that we should be allowed to do things that otherwise would not be permissible. The doctors, again, argued what we did was legal, and they argued what we did was even humane in some twisted sense of that word, and it was expedient. They actually gained useful medical knowledge. That's another misconception that people have about the Nazi doctors, is that they were just total quacks who were doing completely scientifically useless experiments and killing people for the fun of it. Well, some of the experiments certainly had no scientific justification, but many of them yielded scientific and medical information that is still found in medical textbooks today. And it's a very difficult ethical question. Well, what do we do with this information that's already known? How do we sort of put that genie back in the bottle? Should we try to at least acknowledge that this scientific information was gotten, by experiments that should never ever be repeated again? And during the pandemic, we started to see some of these same kinds of justifications being put forward as to why we should abandon core ethical principles like informed consent, which is the very first principle articulated in the Nuremberg Code. You saw, well, we're in a state of emergency, so the normal ways of doing things can be suspended legally and ethically. Well, we need to do this for the sake of efficiency or for the sake of convenience. A needle in every arm, even if it's going to harm some people, a sort of one-size-fits-all public health policy is necessary for the sake of efficiency, for example. That was a very common argument that you heard from our public health agencies. And so when these arguments started to resurface, it worried me a lot, because history doesn't repeat itself. But as Mark Twain said, while it doesn't repeat itself, it often rhymes. So historical analogies are useful, not because a Nazi regime is going to rise up in the United States, but because, if some of the principles and some of the arguments that were advanced in Germany in the 1930s that led to very bad places are starting to be deployed again, that is cause for serious concern.
No, absolutely. There's this question of, why was natural immunity ignored?
I think there's several reasons. I quipped on Twitter a year or two ago that the CDC will recognize natural immunity when someone figures out how to monetize it. So, when I filed my lawsuit on behalf of people with natural immunity, about 50% of the American population at that time had natural immunity, which would have cut $100 billion industry, the vaccine industry, in half. Those profits would have been cut in half if half the population no longer needs your product. That number is closer to 90% today. So there were financial interests at work pushing us in the direction of a needle in every arm, even for people who didn't need the vaccine because they had superior immunity from a prior infection.